Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. During this show, we explore the order and the beauty of the cosmos and your connection to it all. My name is Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with
Levine, and I'm the founder of something or another, but at this point, I am merely Amanda's cosmic connection, or one of her cosmic connections. I'm happy. I'm happy to be one of your cosmic connections.
Oh gosh, me too. I'm so happy about it. All right, well, so we have a topic today that we've actually received quite a few questions about over time, and I'm sure Rick's heard this question a million times, but it is, how do we healthfully what are healthy ways to deal with difficult aspects, difficult transits, difficult placements? And we're going to have Rick address that for us here today.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it breaks down in a lot of different ways. And unlike some topics that you throw a question at me and then 50 minutes later I pause for a breath and you get to say something, this probably will have more give and take because it's less a stock answer than it is a whole bunch of considerations. And there is no quick and easy answer, which is where I will start. As you may have heard me say before, prior to the internet, when one became an astrologer, there was really only one methodology for gaining clients, and that was taking an ad out in the yellow pages. Now, for those of you who are under 20 years of age or even 25 years of age and maybe have never seen a yellow pages, this was a listing of all the businesses in alphabetical order by what the businesses were. Air conditioning to zoologists, I don't know. And an astrologer would take out an ad under astrologers, so that in a decent sized city, you might have one or two or three people who had a listing, and then you would wait for your phone to ring. Well, my phone would ring and I would pick it up and go, hello. And they would go, yes, this is so-and-so. I'm looking for Rick Levine, the astrologer. I've just met someone and I need to know whether this person is the right person for me, or I'm having a really difficult time and I need to know what to do, or my house is for sale and someone told me Mercury is retrograde and that's a bad transit and I shouldn't sell my house now. So I just have some questions and I need some answers. My standard response was something like the following. I think you might have misdialed. I think you're looking for the answer astrologer and you inadvertently have reached the question astrologer. And of course, at that point, you'd hear this, huh? And I would say, well, I get that you're looking for answers. The problem is that I'm not going to give you any answers. I can't give you any answers. And if I was your advisor, which I realize I'm not yet, I would advise you to steer clear of anyone who had any answers because they're not serving you well. I said, part of the problem is that I'm really good at giving answers. And so if I give you an answer, chances are you're going to take that as the answer. But it's not your answer. It's my answer to your set of circumstances. And therefore, I would caution you and anyone who is seeing an astrologer, a tarot card reader, a psychic of any sort, to understand that if someone is answering your question, it's their answer. And if you accept their answer, what happens is your process stopped. I had a philosophy teacher in college as an undergraduate, and this philosophy professor used to teach that the search creates the reality. As long as you're asking questions, you're generating reality. If you stop asking questions, you stop creating reality. You stagnate, you stay where you are. And I think that most of us have lost a close friend, relative, love, to Shoshuran Buddhism, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Scientology, Dianetics, Jesus, quantum physics, or something. Because when that becomes the answer, that person stops looking, and there's nothing to talk to them about anymore because their reality has been stopped where they are, and they might be happy for a while. And maybe if they luck out, maybe that happiness or satisfaction will last. The problem is that that is a stopgap measure. It's like giving an infant a pacifier. It doesn't answer the question. It just stops the asking of the questions. So having said that, when I hear what's a healthy way to handle a difficult transit, or I have this awful chart. Every time I go to an astrologer, they look at it, and after they clean up their vomit on the table, they go, okay, now let's go on with the reading. I know my horoscope sucks really bad. What can I do? And I go, wait a minute, they're asking a question. I'm not going to answer it. Now, one might say, well, then what the hell is your job? And I've had this discussion, incidentally, with many, many contemporaries, many of whom have been inner circle guides on the Astrology Hub, many of some of the most well-known and competent astrologers in the world. And it's a bit of let's say a riff, but there is a division in astrology as to the role of prediction and or answering questions. And I've had contemporaries of mine saying, I could never do that. My clients pay me to give them answers, and I look at their chart and I give them answers. People doing horary astrology, that's what the system is built upon. It's a branch of astrology that uses the moment of the question rather than the natal horoscope to derive an answer to the question being asked with very specific rules. So this is a bit of a bias that I have, and I'm willing to defend it and talk about it and explore it as a total subject unto itself. But I have to mention that because when I hear what is a healthy way to deal with a difficult chart or a difficult transit, something that's going on up there, like right now we have Jupiter today that is conjuncting Pluto, which it does every 13 years. But for all practical purposes, that can be a difficult aspect that affects everybody, whether or not it's wired into your chart. So the first question is, what if I have a chart with difficult aspects in it? The second part of that question is, what if there are difficult aspects going on up there right now? And the third part is, what if those aspects that are difficult going on up there right now are making aspects to my natal chart? And then a subset of that is, what if planets just right now are making a difficult aspect to my natal chart? It's all the same question, but it's all different nuances of the same question. Are we together so far?
We're totally together.
I'm going to take a sip of water and you can think of a question.
Following.
Okay, so I also would need to mention that in traditional astrology, the astrology is based upon judgment, meaning that there are specific labels that define certain things that are good or bad. Now, we have to be careful about using these words because they may not mean exactly the same thing to us moderners as they did to ancients. But the fact of the matter is that there are malefic planets and there are benefic planets. Those are the technical astrological word. The malefics are the bad guys, and the benefics are the beneficial or the good guys. And so we start right away with a prejudice that Mars is a malefic because it's a bad planet, whereas Venus is a benefic, it's a good planet. Jupiter is a benefic, good planet. Saturn is a malefic, it's a bad planet. So these are inherent biases. When someone says, what's a healthy way to deal with a bad transit? Well, that might be a malefic making an afflicted aspect, another technical word from traditional astrology, classical astrology. And an affliction defines a certain connection between either a planet and its house or sign, or a planet and its aspect to another planet. For example, if you were born with Mars square Saturn in your chart, your Mars would be considered to be afflicted. So, go tell that to the Nobel Prize winner who spent 40 years of his or her life working hard, figuring out how something worked, and getting frustrated because again and again they didn't get it right, but they stuck to it, and all of a sudden they found an answer to a question that resulted in their winning the Nobel, being awarded the Nobel Prize. We have to be careful about starting off with the question, how do I deal with bad transits or a bad chart? Now, having said that, there certainly are transits, charts that are easier and harder. And here I go to my Olympic metaphor to redefine good and bad. And when I say the Olympic metaphor, I'm talking about the judging of certain events. Diving is a good example. That in diving and in gymnastics, I think also, the judges give two separate scores. They give one for level of execution, so that if you do your dive or your triple twist or whatever you're doing gymnastically, pardon my ignorance here, I've observed, but I would not try to pass myself off as someone who is well versed in some of these terms. But in diving, I am a little bit. So, someone who does a swan dive might get a 10 out of 10 on level of execution. Whereas someone who does a reverse 2.5 flip with 1.5 twists might only get a 7.2 on a level of execution, except the one that does the backwards flip with a twist might have a much higher rating on level of difficulty. So here is the way I look at transits. They're not good or bad. They either have a higher or lower level of difficulty. It doesn't take much. Well, maybe I shouldn't say it doesn't take much. Many people can master a swan dive and get a 9.0 or better. But not many people can master that 2.5 backflip with a 1.5 twist and get anything over a 4 or a 5 or a 6. And if you reach a level of excellence there, you're not only getting your 8 or 9 or 10 points for level of excellence, you're also getting additional points for level of difficulty. So from that standpoint, we now have a totally different way of framing what's a healthy way to handle a bad transit. The real question is, what can I do to find healthy expressions for natal configurations or transits that don't necessarily express easily on their own? Because there are some aspects you don't need to do anything for. There are aspects that traditional astrology would call good aspects. A grand trine. A trine is a good aspect. Why? Because they work. If you have Jupiter trine, if you have Venus trine Jupiter, that's two benefics, two good planets in a good aspect. So there's nothing you got to do. Just show up and it'll be awesome. People will like you. You'll make money. It's just like, because the energy flows. A trine is like superconductivity. When you bring things down to very low temperatures, close to absolute zero, there's no resistance. You get a pulse of electricity going through a wire, it'll keep going forever because there's no resistance. Now, to the ancients, that was great. If you had two planets that were trine, especially if they were good planets, good aspect, good planets, man, you were in horoscope heaven. Add to that a third planet, add the moon, mutually trine Jupiter on one side and Venus on the other, and now you have a grand trine with 3 wonderful, yummy planets just having a field day. And the ancients said, grand trine, benefic, 2 benefics with the moon. Gee, what could be better than that? Well, maybe they'll be in happy signs that make them happy, and so that's the origin of a good aspect. The problem is, from a developmental psychology standpoint, or a standpoint of spiritual development, someone with that type of grand trine may not be able to get any traction in life in general. Why? Because their wheels are always spinning smoothly. And so I had a client once a number of years ago who was in a very difficult relationship, struggled, did therapy, hated his job, ended up leaving a long-term marriage, leaving children behind, moving across the country, leaving a successful career, beginning a new career, starting a new life. And within 3 years, everything that was the same in his old life that he hated was all back again, just with different names, dates, places, and times. But the energy was the same. Why? Because the grand trine worked. Grand trines are good because they're easy. But easy isn't necessarily good, because it's hard to be creative when everything is flowing smoothly. Look at all the tortured artists in the world. It takes a square, which would be often considered to be an affliction in ancient astrology, because squares take work. They're not fun. They're harder. And if they're squares between 2 hard planets, let's say the 2 malefics, Mars and Saturn, if they're square, man, well, now you have an afflicted situation with malefics. Good luck, dude. Except the person who masters a harder dive is going to get higher points. So are you with me here as to where I'm coming from in all of this?
Definitely.
Now, back to the question, because there's a real question here. And does the astrologer have anything to offer? And I think that astrology does have something to offer. But I think the overall question to what's a healthy way to handle, and I'm going to say, instead of a bad chart or a bad transit, I'm going to say a challenging chart or a challenging transit. And the way to handle it is to continue leaning into it and finding ways to express the planets that are involved in it. Because if you bury it, if you put it into denial, if you avoid it, if you distract yourself with other things in your life, the problem that occurs from that stressful aspect won't go away. In fact, it will get worse. So herein enters the whole modern 20th century depth psychology that stemmed from the work of Freud and Jung and Adler and Reich and Jung and Fromm and Alexander Lowen. And I mean, the list is long and long and long. And then it goes on to the radical changes in the 60s with Gestalt psychology and Fritz Perls and Maslow and all these brilliant people who developed techniques of working with clients to work through their stuff so that they could live happier and healthier lives. And even though they didn't have the astrological metaphor, what they were all trying to do, without necessarily the use of astrology, maybe with the exception of Jung, what they were all trying to do is they were trying to help their patient or their client express that which was bottled up. We astrologers could say that in a slightly different way. We could say every planet wants a voice. Every planet wants a piece in the greater whole. Some planets are going to express really easily. If you have Mars in your chart conjuncting your natal moon in Sagittarius and trining Jupiter, well, that's going to express so easily that it's probably going to overexpress. That's a problem of its own. But more often than not, we have planets that are either in conjunction with one another, and these planets are in some ways opposite energies, or planets that are opposed or square, or half square, semi-square, or square and a half, sesqui-square. And those angles based upon geometry, based upon sacred geometry, those angles are all angles where expression is difficult. Think of a dam on a river. The river just wants to flow to the sea. A square or an opposition is like a dam being built on the river, and the river is now blocked up. Now, that's great if you're creating drinking water, but it's not good if it's blocked up so much that when there's a storm, that the dam breaks and floods and kills everyone who lives in the valley. You know, a dammed river is by itself not necessarily a good thing unless it's in some way has controlled releases, which is part of what therapy is all about. It's learning to take those planets that are either overexpressing or underexpressing and figuring out ways to throttle that energy with awareness so that they don't overexpress and exhaust us and those around us, or so they don't underexpress and creating physical stress, then create either somatic illness or psychological problems where stuff is built up so much that we're not on the outside at all like we feel on the inside. So from that standpoint, there are many things that one can do, but it is not a one size fits all. It depends on the planets. It depends on where they are in the chart, the houses, the signs. It depends on the aspects they're making. It depends on what aspects are being made to them by the transiting planets. And it also depends on the history of what you've developed in your life as to how you deal with or don't deal with that particular configuration in your natal chart, or how you deal with or don't deal with prior stress onto that particular planet from transiting planets moving around. And so herein now brings us to a point of saying, well, what can astrology do and how can I use it to improve my life? Now, one of the things, I know I said I wasn't going to ramble on forever, but here I go, I guess. One of the things that I hear again and again from both longtime professional astrologers and from people who are just getting into astrology and learning it, and it's maybe the second or third most common reason that people contact me for a reading, and that is, oh my God, I'm coming up to this transit. It's the worst transit of my life. I am so afraid of what's going to happen. Pluto is coming to conjunct my natal moon, or Saturn's conjuncting my natal sun, or this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction around the solstice this year is going to be squaring my natal Mars. And oh my God, what should I do? My life's going to fall apart. I'm going to get sick. Am I going to die? Am I going to lose my children? And blah, 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 blah. Well, the fear of an event that hasn't happened creates a ridge that actually encourages the manifestation of the worst case scenario. So the first thing you need to do if you got a difficult transit coming up is to realize that the transit is neither good nor bad. The planets go round. It's all part of the process. It's all part of the whole. How you respond to that transit actually is an act of free will, although the transit itself is an act of fate. If you were born natally with a Saturn-Mars conjunction in Cancer, that is an act of fate. Okay, there are those who would say, well, no, it was the free will of my spirit or soul, and I took this contract. And fine, I'm not arguing that. But from your standpoint of where you are now, there's nothing you can do to undo that. You are born with, and your chart has this aspect that the ancients would consider to be difficult. Mars conjunct Saturn in Cancer. not good for at least 3 reasons without even knowing what else it's doing in the chart. Mars is not happy in Cancer. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. It's in its fall in Cancer, not happy. Saturn, in fact, is not happy in Cancer because it's in its domicile. It's in its home sign. And I think I mixed up fall and detriment, Mars would be in its detriment and Saturn in its sign opposite its ruler would be in its fall. You probably can tell that I don't lean on dignities, planetary dignity all that much. I'm aware of it. I've observed it, but there are other people who do this way more seriously better, and it's a useful technique. But I think it also goes back to, in my mind, the judgment of good and bad. Mars in Cancer is not good from a traditional standpoint because Mars is fiery and feisty and it's macho, and Cancer is wussy and feminine and receptive and lunar. And so Mars in Cancer is considered to be weak, yielding, passive, maybe passive aggressive. I mean, those are all judgments that make Mars in Cancer less than. And all I can say is anyone who's ever seen a mother lion defending her cubs knows that, that Mars in Cancer, it can be that whole idea of defending one's home territory or family or loved ones. There's nothing wussy about that. There's nothing passive about that. It's simply negative from the standpoint of the judgment of the patriarchy. And here we have to remember, and I know I say this, and I'm sure many other astrologers, we have a whole generation of astrologers who, have grown into this from birth and understand this on a much deeper level than even I do, even though I'm a great champion of it. And that is, astrology was written by guys for guys, period. It was the women, first of all, unless you were Cleopatra or, Queen Victoria, didn't have your chart done, you were basically objects to or subjects to royalty or to your husband or to the males who owned you, in effect. And that all the early astrologers, probably coming all the way up to, there may be some exceptions in here, but pretty much coming all the way up to the 20th century, maybe Evangeline Adams is the first great, feminine astrologer that I can think of. And I'm sure, well, no, would go back to Alice Bailey. I mean, there are certainly some before, but largely, astrology was written by and maintained by monks. They were all boys, or at least they identified on the outside as such. So the problem here is that, again, we have Mars conjuncting Saturn in Cancer. This is like awful because there are two planets that are malefics that are combined, which makes them afflicted, and they're in signs in which they are also have a harder time finding their place of expression. And I know several people who were born, I think, in 1946. There was a Mars-Saturn conjunction. And I just happen to know a couple of people at the top of my mind who were born with that conjunction. One of them, I think, started maybe 5 or 6 businesses that all bankrupted. Now, this person also was an Aries. So his Mars in Cancer, the fact is that Mars was hypercharged because Mars is the planet of Aries. But this guy would start a business and it would be awesome. And he would double and then double again in size and then hire 150 people and then hire 350 people. And he'd have this amazing business and then it would go bankrupt because it grew too fast. And I think he did that 5 times in his life. This is not an easy transit But on the sixth time, he got it right. And he created a multi-million-dollar business that's at the top of its field, that employs people all around the world, that's a leader in the technology that he'd been working on his whole life. And the company, I think he's now retired, and the company is one of those companies that will outlive the creator because it was done brilliantly. Now, that happened while planets were moving through Scorpio, trining his Mars Saturn conjunction in Cancer. Point being that there was a really hard aspect, not a bad aspect. Well, bad if you counted the votes before the election was over, so to speak. It was bad, if after the first or second or third or fourth bankruptcy, you go, this guy's a mess, can't do anything in his life. But he kept showing up. And he kept pushing back against it rather than just letting it overtake him. It was like mastering that 3.5 turn backflip with a 1.5 twist. It's like, if you master a difficult situation, then the extra points start rolling in. So there are things that we can do. You see, the body, all biological systems are maintained by something biologists call homeostasis. Homeostasis is the thing that makes sure that your body temperature doesn't go much below 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and it doesn't go much above 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Homeostasis is the biological mechanism that keeps us in the zone where we can survive, where it's not, it's the Goldilocks thing. It's not too little and it's not too much. As long as you're in homeostasis, keeps readjusting biological and chemical things to keep us in that system, or to keep us in that space. By the same token, when we have a transit, let's stick with Saturn, because Saturn is such a badass planet by transit. People have a lot of fear around Saturn transits. After all, Saturn is Satan, is the grim reaper. Saturn is you get what you deserve. We're humans, we were born of original sin, so we deserve shit. This is all part of Saturn's power. And I think the same could be said not only for Mars, but even extending it out to Pluto, even though Pluto itself is not traditionally a malefic, because Pluto was not in existence or not in our awareness as a planet back when these labels were created. But it would be if they were created today. Saturn may not be easy, but Saturn has a purpose. So when we're working with a transit in our lives where Saturn is approaching or entering the sign where our sun is, or our moon is, or our ascendant rising sign, these are times when we can assume one way or another Saturn will cause or will correspond with some crystallization, some resistance, some giving structure to our lives. And we may not want to do that. We may be commitment phobic in a relationship, and Saturn comes along and says, not going to get away with it now. What are you going to do about it? One person will go out on a drug binge and kill themselves. Another person will pretend that everything is fine and just get married or make a commitment, and then be unhappy 3 or 5 or 10 years later, and then want to kill themselves. I'm caricaturizing here, obviously. And another person will say, gee, I have some hard work to do on myself. I need to figure out what's going on here. And that person might actually begin a process of internal exploration that might correspond with some form of therapy. And obviously, when we talk about therapies, we can talk about modern psychotherapy. We can talk about counseling. We can talk about a religious counselor. We can talk about various self-help tools like meditation and yoga, and even things like developing routines like working out, or something that gets the endorphins and the right chemicals going, changing diets. I mean, there are many things that we can do that are ways in which we can engage a difficult transit and turn it into something healthy, because the transit itself is neither good nor bad. The transit is just a change in energy dynamics. How we respond to it makes it feel good or bad based upon how something happens in our life, and and we're not happy in a job, but it's paying our rent and paying for our monthly payment on our Maserati or whatever it is. And one day we go into work and we lose our job, and 2 months later we still can't find new work, and our wife basically says, you're not the breadwinner that I married, and I'm not happy, and you need to get this together. And now you have not only the pressure of no job, but the pressure of realizing that the emotional support that you'd like from your relationship doesn't seem to be there either. And then a family member gets sick. Now, I mean, all of these things are difficult situations. One person will respond to that in a way of just having their entire life collapse and everything fall apart, and that's that. They'll let the marriage go, they'll stop looking for work, whatever. And another person will say, all right, I got some work to do here on myself and figure out what's going on. And it may be that going through the motions doesn't necessarily solve the issues. And this is another great thing that we have to be aware of, in any of the healing arts, but certainly as astrologers, that astrologers often look at a chart and go, oh, here's what you need to do, and blah, 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 and they're done. And the person does that and nothing happens. And now they think, well, is astrology not working? Or does astrology work and I'm a total fuck up and I'm not working and I'm never going to get it right, because obviously, even when I do the right things, nothing happens. So we have to be really careful about engaging people with what we flippantly think is the right answer to fix something that may or may not be fixable in the terms that we think that they could or should be fixed. And this is another whole layer. I remember many years ago attending a lecture by James Hillman. It was at an astrology conference. And for those viewers who know James Hillman's work, James Hillman was kind of the honorary torchbearer of what was Jungian psychology. And it was somehow transformed into something that's now called transpersonal psychology. Some people refer to various parts of this as liberation psychology, or but it's a much different incarnation of Jung's individuation process that has more to do with that in relationship to a greater whole, in relationship to culture, in relationship to cosmos, in relationship to transpersonal energies in general. And Hillman gave a keynote address at this astrology conference I attended. Gosh, this must have been 20 years ago, I'm thinking, in San Francisco. And Hillman got up to the podium and he opened this conference with this keynote address. And having Hillman speak at an astrology conference was a coup, because although he was, like Jung, an astrologer, an astrology follower, someone who knew transits, who looked at charts, it was not part of his professional appearance, and therefore he did not wave it around. But here he was speaking at this astrology conference, and his opening line was, before I start my talk, I just want to make sure that everyone knows I don't believe in astrology. And he started his talk. And of course, people were freaking out. And the person who was chairing the conference, Rick Tarnas, the author of Cosmos and Psyche, the following day after Hillman had gone, started the second day's proceedings. And he said, by the way, I just need to clear up some stuff from last night. Because I know there were a lot of people who were really upset. They were, pleased that we had Hillman here, but were really upset that he started off with this disclaimer saying he doesn't believe in astrology. However, I'm here to tell you that, he uses astrology. He knows astrology. I can't tell you how many times we've had discussions about family members and friends and so on. And that what he said was something that he often says, but it was only the first line of what he often says. And what he often says is, I don't believe in astrology, but I don't believe in a hammer either. However, if it's the proper tool, I will use it. Now, I've just paraphrased him, but and it was just kind of put that in its place. But the reason I'm sharing this with you is that the title of Hillman's talk was maybe the strangest lecture title. I mean, I've given hundreds, maybe 100, I don't know, lots of lectures over the years. And coming up with titles is always a trick because you got to do it 6 months or a year in advance and then write a little description. And then a year later, you have to give the talk that you thought you'd be interested in giving, a year prior. And the title of Hillman's talk still, I mean, I can see it on the program and I can remember my looking at it going, huh. And the title of his talk was a quote from Paracelsus, who was I think 11th or maybe 12th century European physician who kind of had broken the mold and was doing things that were different. I mean, he was using astrology. He was looking at remedies as part of dealing with sickness in a larger context. But he was a doctor. And the Paracelsus quote that was the title of Hillman's talk was this that follows. Quote, heaven retains half of all maladies. That was it. What? Heaven retains half of all maladies. By the way, the lecture is available online. I think there's a transcript of it. You can probably find it somewhere. It's a brilliant lecture, but the point of the matter is that just giving someone the right medicine or giving someone the right answer or the right tool doesn't necessarily fix things that are not fixable from a human perspective, because we are part and parcel of this larger complexity of the order and the beauty of the cosmos, and therefore heaven retains half of all maladies. Anything that goes wrong is not just about something happening in a cell. It's about something that we look at and we want to quickly say that's good or bad or healthy or unhealthy. But the question becomes, how do we work with this in a larger context, knowing that there are larger contexts that are large enough that we don't get to change them. If you were living, in Nagasaki on the day of the bombing, it didn't matter whether you had accumulated a lot of good karma. You were there, And so there are things that are transpersonal, that are environmental. And I think it's an important consideration in this question of how do we deal with difficult transits. Now, coming back and being more specific, I have talked here at other times, maybe a month or two ago, about my take about homeopathy and astrology. And I would say that when it comes to difficult things in a chart, when it comes to transits that may be difficult, our tendency is to deal with them allopathically, meaning our tendency is to take them head on and apply the opposite, and often there is a homeopathic approach that says, how do I increase the discomfort so that it actually can process on through? rather than pretending it's not there, or creating a symptomectomy and just making it go away while I kind of, what's the word, power on through, or there's another word where you just push on through whatever it is. You man up and you just, then you kind of deal with whatever it is that's falling apart in your life. And going back to the, person who's lost their job and their family isn't supporting them, and then a parent is ill, this may be on some level an absolute blessing, because the person has time to recreate a relationship with a parent that had been rotten for 20 or 30 years. And now, because they don't have a job, they actually can jump into that, and it changes everything about them as they deepen and widen their whole connection to their self and their soul, that then alters the relationship with their spouse. And I'm not saying everything that happens that's difficult comes out happy. That's, that's a function of what the ego would like. And the ego in this is just one piece of a larger puzzle. And I do think of so many Saturn transits in my own life and in lives of people I know, where the person going through it was kind of ready to, kill themselves or kill someone else. And I don't really mean that physically. I mean that metaphorically, where it was like, I can't deal with this. This is like, my life's falling apart. This is awful. So-and-so's doing this to me, and I'm going to blah, 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 whatever it is, only to find 3 or 5 or 12 years later, the person looking back at that exact same event and saying, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that happened to me. I then did this, and I didn't do that, and then that happened, and then this happened, and I wouldn't be here in my life, which is really just working out better than I could have possibly imagined then. And so we have to be careful about this good, bad thing. I remember Ram Dass used to tell this story. He said it was an old Zen teaching. I don't know where, Chinese, I think. I don't know where it comes from for sure. But he said that there was a Zen master who was the teacher of the children in a small Chinese village. And his son used to go off hunting and come back. And one day his son goes off hunting, and a week or two goes by and his son doesn't come back. And the villagers all come to him and go, "Oh, this is terrible. Something's happened to your son. It's awful, and we're so sorry." And he says, "Good news, bad news. Who's to know?" And a few days later, his son comes back with 2 wild horses, and he couldn't ride them because they were wild. And so he had to walk back from wherever he had been. And the villagers all come to him and go, "Oh, teacher, this is so wonderful. You're the wealthiest person in the village now. What a wonderful thing. You have these 2 horses. This is the most magnificent." And he would say, "Good news, bad news. Who's to know?" And a few days later, his son is breaking in one of the horses and gets thrown and breaks his leg. And the villagers come to him and go, "Oh, this is awful. It's springtime. And without your son, how are you going to be able to plant your crops? This is a catastrophe. We don't even know what to say. This is the worst thing that could have possibly happened." And the Zen master goes, "Good news, bad news. Who's to know?" And a few days later, the king's army comes through town conscribing all the eligible young men, and can't take his son but you see, this is what happens. And so I look at how do I deal with a bad transit? How do I deal with this bad thing in my chart? Trial and error. And with a little help from your friends. And when I say from your friends, I mean from your real friends and from your friends that you pay. And your friends that you pay are your doctors and your attorneys and your accountants and your therapists and your massage practitioner and your personal trainer and whomever it is that you pay, that between those and your friends who may do some of the same things for only emotional pay or whatever, that there's no quick and easy answer. But part of the puzzle is not being afraid to stop asking questions, because when someone gives you an answer and you stop asking questions, then you're, what's the technical word? Fucked. then you're in trouble, because that's when we run into a place where we're fearful and we close down from what we might learn from or what we might need to know, or when we're so sure that what we're doing is exactly right, and nothing else that comes into our being, into our sphere is going to matter. These two extremes, where I would say a good deal of the human population is at right now, because we were at a real stress point. We're at a stress point where, where hundreds of years of recent evolution, and certainly 150 years of industrial revolution, have now hit the digital age, and things are changing. And there are those people who are willy-nilly open to accepting anything and everything as far as change goes. And there are those people who are totally frightened of that and want to make something as great as they see it in their imagination as it was in the past. And of course, psychologists call this infantile regression, where we want to go back to some perfect past that really wasn't perfect. And I'm not saying that's any worse than the group that is just going, wow, everything is great. And this is the dilemma that we find ourselves in right now. It's like a combination of good transits and bad transits. And the good transits, we just want to open up and not put any resistance towards and just accept them as is. And the bad transits, we want to go away. And so whatever we can do to close our eyes or to shut them down or to shut it down and make it go away, this is the extremes. And both of those extremes are problematic without dialogue, because the search creates the reality. And as long as we have two discrete parts of the population off in an enclosed bubble, we're going to be stuck in this. And the extremes are going to get greater and greater. And I know that's not what you asked me about specifically, but you asked me about bad or difficult transits. And, the perfect storm of 2020, where we have this once every 30 year, 35, 40 year Saturn-Pluto conjunction, a once every 500 year or so Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Saturn's home sign of Capricorn, coupled with a conjunction of a once every 13-year conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto, but only once every 50 or 60 years does that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction actually happen 3 times, which it did this time. And you add to that the fact that that even while we're in that same mix of energies, we're having a once every 20-year Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which in itself would be plenty. But this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is a once in every 200-year change of element. And so you put this all together, and we are at this crazy confluence that many astrologers would call a bad chart or bad transits, whereas a person who was aware of spiritual development and developmental psychology and depth psychology would go, this may be the most amazing opportunity that humanity has ever had to step up to the plate, transform, go through its metamorphosis, and come out a butterfly rather than crawling around as a caterpillar. So again, this is a good example of how we look at a bad transit and panic and make a worst case scenario out of it and turn it into something that becomes that looks like the transit is creating it, when in fact we are creating it, because free will is how we react to those things which occur out there, which are neither good nor bad. Is autumn good or bad? Well, if you're a leaf on a tree, it might be bad from a human perspective because the leaf on the tree actually dies. But if you're a leaf on the tree, you might actually know that this is your liberation from having to work hard every day, and you'll be back in a few months anyhow, and it's just part of a larger process. So we have to be careful about these judgments about what's good and what's bad. There is no good weather or bad weather. There is no good season or bad season. They're just changes. They're just seasons. And I hate to go biblical, but it's Ecclesiastes, and that is, to everything there is a season. There's a time for this and a time for that. And the same would be said for transits. There's a time for transiting Saturn to conjunct your natal sun, which for many people is a really tough period of time, because Saturn is about Saturn is the eye of the needle. Saturn is the pulling in and the constriction of crystallization, which can be very painful if I'm wanting to grow. Here I am thinking, wow, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and Saturn comes in and goes, and so my reaction is to push Saturn away. And once a Saturn, kind of pushing in on me, once I engage it by pushing it away, I've basically labeled the name of the game. And the name of the game is a pressure against my will against Saturn's, and Saturn will win because it's one against a cosmic force. So instead, and then the flip side of that is sometimes I'll really have something that in my life I like, and a Saturn transit, like Saturn coming up to the sun, Saturn will come along and go, nope, that's not serving you, taking it away. And you go, oh my God, no, you're not. And you reach it and you start pulling it in. And the more you pull it in, the more Saturn pulls it away, which makes you pull it in more, which makes Saturn pull it away more. And now you got yourself a bad situation. I'm not saying that we should just let reality roll over us, and anything that's taken away, we let go, and anything that appears in our path, we take as ours. Instead, I'm saying, think like building a dam. There's a purpose towards the construction, towards the use, towards the when, to everything. There's a season to when am I filling the lake with water, and when am I going to use the dam to let that water out to irrigate the crops or to create hydroelectricity. This whole idea of using a transit to get the most pulse out of it becomes something that's very important. And again, it comes back to what can you do in a time of a difficult transit? There is only one thing you can do ultimately, and that is alter your awareness. That is the catalyst for changing other things. In changing one's awareness, you might become a vegan. In changing one's awareness, you might begin exercising. In changing one's awareness, you might talk your spouse or partner into beginning therapy with you so that you can untangle some things that are difficult issues. In changing your awareness, you might leave an abusive situation. I always think of my old astrology buddy partner, Jeff. He used to say, I had this client call me last week and says, I'm in this abusive relationship. My husband beats me. I need to talk to an astrologer. And Jeff said, no, you don't need to talk to an astrologer. You need a policeman and an attorney. There's an order at which we need to do things. But you can't think about getting a policeman and or an attorney until you alter your awareness. When we change our awareness, that gives us the ability, it gives us the license, it actually demands that we make other changes. And as crazy as this sounds, I'm of the belief that when we change our awareness, often what we're changing is the past. People go, you can't change the past, it's happened. This happened, the United States came into being on July 4th, 1776. That's the past. That's what happened. Yes, but as we go through therapy, we alter our perception around the events that change the nature of that event. And when we change the past, that then alters the choices that we have in the present, that then can alter our trajectory. But we're not changing the future. We're changing the trajectory by altering the past. That's what therapy is. Talk therapy, all of the talk therapies have to do with going back and recreating a past story that doesn't have falsities in it, that you don't have to repeat your neurosis to untangle something that's already happened, instead bringing things into the light. This is Pluto's work, bringing the hidden things into the light. Now we come full circle around to today's Jupiter conjunction to Pluto. And my daily today was a picture of the ocean where there was turmoil, waves coming up from the bottom. And the oceanographic word for that phenomenon is upwelling. An upwelling can be either in seawater or magma. It's a liquid that comes up from the bottom and up to the surface. And upwellings are really interesting because in the ocean, an upwelling brings up nutrient-rich, clean, cold water that when it comes to the surface, it then energizes and feeds the surface with this new nutrient-rich water. And by the same token, feelings in the Jungian construct are water. And when feelings are buried, just like magma, liquid rock, just like water, liquid water, when that comes up to the surface, it can come up with huge force. I recently on one of my talks, I don't think it was here, I talked about how when you scuba dive, down around 30, 40, 50 feet, and you blow out a bubble, and you watch that bubble go up. As the bubble goes up, the bubble expands until by the time it hits the surface, it's almost explosive because it expands because of the lack of pressure. It expands as it goes to the surface. Well, the same thing happens with thoughts. We have these plutonic, dense, hidden, fear-driven parts of things that we can't acknowledge, that we've stuffed down into the bottoms of our seas of consciousness. And as Jupiter begins to expand some of them, they begin to rise to the surface. And as this hidden stuff comes out into the open, it can be rather explosive, but it's only when something is brought into awareness that we can then incorporate it into the reconstruction of our past, so we can then alter our choices in the present moment, which then alters our trajectory into the future. So how do you handle difficult, challenging, stressful aspects, whether they're natally or whether they're happening to everyone, like this Jupiter-Pluto is to everyone right now? Incidentally, Jupiter is expansive. Pluto is the hidden. It's the unseen. And we've had 3 hits on this current Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. The first hit was the beginning of April, which was the first wave of explosive mortality, regardless of whether you think COVID is bioengineered or partly media hoax, or whether it's real, or whether it will be solved by that. I don't care what your beliefs are. I mean, I care, but that's not the issue. The issue is that the first bulge in statistics, the Jupiterian expansion of statistics of both caseload and mortality around the world, occurred at the first Jupiter expansion, Pluto hidden conjunction back at the end of March, beginning of April. The second wave, which I think I might have suggested would occur here back at the first, was at the end of June. And the end of June, beginning of July, there was a couple-week lag, was again, some people were calling it the second wave, and other people were saying, no, this is still part of the first wave. I don't care. It's all one wave or no waves, but there was a second rise in the graph. And the third and final Jupiter-Pluto conjunction is occurring, or maybe has occurred today. I don't know what the exact time of it is. Let's see. It is. It has it not occurred yet? I don't know. Yeah, it actually it occurred just a little bit ago. But they're still they're within minutes of arc, Jupiter and Pluto together. And we're seeing this rise right now that, unlike the first wave, which was New York City was a mess, now we're seeing it pretty much all over the country, especially the central part of the country. But I mean, there are, again, separate from what you think of this individually in the political scenario, the fact of the matter is that there is a rise in the pandemic of fear. And I've said this more than once here, that the real pandemic is a pandemic of fear, Jupiter expanding the hidden unconscious realms, and that COVID is a very real symptom of this pandemic of fear. but we are at the third point of it. Now, again, the reason why I'm mentioning this is astrologically, this could be considered a difficult transit. So what do? Well, you come back to, my rule number one, which I stole from Ram Dass, and that is, trust in Allah or whatever you name your deity and tie your camel. Both. It's the person at the flood who turns down the boat and then turns down the helicopter saying, God will save me, God will save me. And then the person realizes they're going to drown and they go, God, I've been praying to you. Why are you letting me drown? And the voice comes from the heavens. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. Trust in God, trust in nature, and tie your camel, whatever that means to you. It's like, bite the bullet and do whatever you would do that would be the most sensible thing to do to be safe. Whether it's self-quarantining, whether it's wearing a mask, whether it's taking andrographis, elderberry, vitamin C, and zinc, I don't care. Make your own plan, but do something that is actually like tying your camel, and also trust in Allah, God, Jesus, Yahweh, whatever label you use. And I would say that is a metaphor for any challenging aspect. And that is tie your camel and have faith in this larger process that you may not understand, that we as humans may not understand, but we often don't understand from the narrow perceptions that we have while we're under the pressure of feeling like, we have no room to breathe, no room to move. Which brings me to one other last point here before I take my proverbial 45-minute breath. And that is that that when we look at transits, when we look at difficult situations in our chart or by transit, things do not happen in a vacuum. We look at one event and it's never about one event. And one of the beautiful things about astrology is, let's go back to the Saturn conjuncting the sun. Let's use Saturn conjuncting the moon because we used Saturn conjuncting the sun before. So the moon is our feelings. The moon is our home. When Saturn comes around every 29 years by transit and conjuncts our moon, it basically pulls in and creates constriction and maybe even a feeling of loss or a feeling of difficulty in those areas of our lives that are lunar, that have to do with nurturing, being nurtured, that have to do with safety and security, that have to do with our home and our family and our mother and how we mother others, whether we're a boy or a girl, I don't care. The thing, though, is that there's nothing bad about Saturn coming around every 29 years and lining up with your natal moon, although it may not feel good while you're going through it. But it may not feel good while you're going through it because you don't understand what's happening. For example, we look at snakes. I know everyone has their snake issue. Some people love them. Some people, whatever. But snakes do this cool thing. And that is that as they grow, they shed their skin so that they can grow bigger, that their skin actually grows to a point and then it can't grow any further. And then they shed their skin and then they grow new skin. Now, from the outside, we look at that and go, wow, is that cool or what? I mean, how cool is it to shed your skin and grow new skin when you get bigger? Well, from the snake's perspective, the snake's going along getting bigger and bigger, and it actually reaches a point where it no longer feels at home in its own skin. In fact, it can't breathe because as the snake inhales, the pressure on the skin is excruciating until at some point, taking that one little extra breath, the skin rips. It's their skin ripping. This has to have some sort of associated pain. If we think of our lives as our metaphysical skin, our home, our family, our emotional support, and as it grows tighter, and we find ourselves in situations where we're not able to express our feelings, we're just like the snake having outgrown its skin. And if we hold our breath and hold our breath and hold our breath until one day something happens and we go, and everything shatters. A marriage ends. We leave someone leaves us. We commit a crime. I mean, whatever it is, stuff happens because something has to give. Now compare that with the person who says, I'm coming into Saturn, coming up to my natal moon, and I know that this is going to be restrictive. I need to look at what areas of my life I'm finding difficulty breathing, and I need to get the people involved in those areas in my life in some sort of process so that we can practice breathing into that skin, so that when it rips gently, because when that skin rips, I'm going to be rare, raw, baby butt new skin. And I want to make sure I'm in an environment that's going to feel safe and protective, because more often than not, we find ourselves after a transiting Saturn conjuncting a natal moon, we find ourselves alone in a world where we've lost our home, our family, our job, our career, our car, or whatever, and we don't know what the hell we're doing, and we're totally raw and rare and don't know, and nothing feels right at all, because we've let things get to a crisis stage rather than dealing with it as it begins to unfold. And again, I come full circle back to the only thing that we can change is our awareness.
Wow. I want to give you a standing ovation right now.
Don't get up.
I mean, that was incredible. And especially with the caveat of this is going to be more of a, a shorter thing with less of an answer. I wrote down 11 things that seemed to be anchor points throughout that talk. And I tried to make it 10, but you just added something that made it 11. So in summary, the question, what should I do? How do I handle it? When we go into these transits looking for someone to give us an answer or a prescription or an antidote, we're already stopping the process that is set in motion to allow us to increase our perception and our awareness. We're actually giving that to someone else and saying, you tell me what I need to do here, versus having that exploration ourselves and learning in the process of exploring the question.
Yeah.
That's number one. Yeah. Okay. Number two, how we define good and bad is key here. So when we look at something and we go, oh, that's good, or oh, that's bad, that a more accurate way of looking at transits would be higher or lower level of difficulty. Some transits are just easy and flowing, and others have more of a tension in the aspect itself that it requires a little more digging in for us to but it gives us a lot of opportunity to grow at exponential levels because of the tension that it has. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good so far.
Okay. So you said that the question revised from how do I deal with a difficult transit, or how do I deal with a bad placement in my chart, would be, how do I find healthy expressions to things that don't express easily on their own?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. There we go. All right. So one of the first tips you gave in doing this is finding ways to express the planets and the aspects. So actually giving them voice instead of being afraid of them and pushing them away, doing more of a lean in and saying, okay, Saturn's coming. What is Saturn all about? What does Saturn want me to grow into and express more of within myself.
Voice dialogue is one of the techniques that allows us to do that, by the way. Not my technique, but it is a technique in psychology where you actually give these different, they don't necessarily use astrology, but by using astrology, we actually can create facets of ourselves that actually have voices that we can engage in dialogue.
And I don't know about you guys, but this year has been a year-long dialogue with Saturn, especially, and Mars more recently. And there's this, something happens when we're in that direct dialogue with them and asking the questions like, what is it in me that needs to come through here? Like, what is it within me that is ripe and ready for growth? So, and depending on the planet would kind of tailor the kinds of questions you ask, right? Okay. So this thing that the transit isn't good or bad, it's our fear. This is number 5. It's our fear that creates the manifestation. So how we respond to it is way more important than whatever our judgment is about the energy itself. The energy itself is basically neutral.
Yeah.
Our fear can actually create something fearful. And so when we have a transit coming up, like I was telling you before we went on, I have Pluto coming to my Sun, Venus, and rising. So technically I could be very afraid of this, right? But my fear could actually create things to be fearful of. And so instead of judging it, just look at it and go, okay, this is happening. How can I lean into Pluto? What is Pluto wanting to bring?
By the way, one of the ways in which, in one of the exercises that we can do if we have a strong Pluto transition that we're coming into, like you do, is to develop, rely on, and practice the familiarity with the process of the caterpillar becoming a butterfly, because that is a Plutonic transformation. And when we look at it from the outside, it's like looking at the snake shedding its skin. Oh, how cool is that? The fact of the matter is that the caterpillar is basically kind of covered itself, or its skin turns into this hard shell. It can't move, it's paralyzed, and then its eyes begin to melt. And then its skin disintegrates. And it basically, it dies. It turns into this pool of sludge, of black-brown goo. And yet the caterpillar, see, it's the ego that fears the death. And I always say that if the caterpillar had an ego like we do, there's no way in hell, and that double entendre is intended, because the realm between death and rebirth is the hell realms. And so the Bardo states. And so if the caterpillar had an ego, there's no way in hell he'd ever get into the damn cocoon. But the caterpillar is just riding a 2 billion year life tide. And so it's not concerned with the fact that its ego is going to die, because somehow it is really just in transformation becoming the butterfly. So often on Pluto transits, we create these scenarios that, or the ego creates them out of fear of what it thinks it's losing. And there often is very real loss. That's not, that's not made up. But what's made up is that the loss has to be painful, that the loss is necessarily bad, because what's really going on is that these losses are occurring so that the ego can be deconstructed, so that the caterpillar can be transformed into the higher form of the butterfly.
Perfect. Okay. Number 6 is remember the context of the definitions that we have today, that they were created by men for men. They were created for specific purposes, and we don't necessarily have to take those things on. So the things like the malefics and the detriments and the falls and all that stuff, that was very contextual for the time.
Yeah, largely created to see who was going to win a war, who was going to be in power, and whether or not someone was going to get laid. I mean,
there you go.
And Kepler, by the way, wrote about all three of those things and hated that astrology was used for that. When people say Kepler didn't believe in astrology, no, he didn't believe in astrology for that purpose, for those purposes, those three purposes, which is what royalty wanted to know. Anyhow.
Okay. So number 7 is to know the purpose of the planet. So if whatever planets are involved in the transit, to know their purpose. What role are they here to play in your life? So again, Saturn may be bringing up an opportunity where you need to start giving more structure to your life. You need to become more disciplined, more focused, more, and then to meet that. So there's a maturation happening. How do you meet it versus resist it and say, oh no, I don't want that to happen. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not gonna say that yet. Okay, number 8 was let go of our attachment to a perceived outcome as good or bad. That there are larger contexts that these things are happening within that we are not privy to in the moment of going through them. So let go of this judgment of the outcome. Oh, I really hope this happens, or I wish this would happen, and know that it's part of a bigger cycle. It's a small point in a bigger cycle. You might not know exactly why it's happening the way it's happening while it's happening, but most likely you will look back and see that was a big, huge turning point in your life that enabled a whole new level of growth for you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, not to just goody things, there are parts of our lives that we look back and go, that really sucked when I went through it. 20 years later, that still really sucked. Just wanting to be clear, I'm not trying to make everything into this wonderful, magical, give it time and it'll transform into something awesome.
No, sometimes things just suck. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. So number 9 is to use a homeopathic approach and to sort of increase the discomfort. The way I think of that is like embracing or becoming it on some level. If you're lonely, like go to the depths of loneliness and just like allow yourself to surrender to the pain of that emotion or that feeling or whatever you're experiencing. So really lean in fully. That's number 9. Number 10 is about enjoying the process, the ride, the journey, having it. I mean, even when it sucks, there can be an element of like, this sucks and I'm alive and I'm here for a reason. You gave the story, the metaphor, the Ram Dass story of the
good news, bad news, who's to know?
Yeah, good news, bad news, who's to know? Okay. And that was number 10. You added a number 11, and then I have a few more key things that you said. Number 11, bring in support. So if you know you're having a certain transit coming in, like see what you can do to arrange your life to support you through that in the best way that you know how.
Yeah, think of it as scaffolding.
Yeah.
If you were building a new building, you would build scaffolding while you were creating the structure. And whether it's your medical or emotional or financial support systems, these are all kinds of variations of scaffolding.
So my daughter Madeline, this fall, I had a reading with Natasha Alter, who looked at Madeline's transits and went, oh my God, like these are challenging for any adult, let alone a 12-year-old. And so here are some things you can do to create an environment to help her use it to become the butterfly, to use it to make it an initiation. So I called in as many of my friends, like fairy godmother type friends for her that she could talk to support her through it. We created ceremonial space on the actual day of the transit and just made it a thing. You're going through an initiation, and she was singing songs to Pluto the day before the thing happened about how awful her life was, and it was both sad and hilarious at the same time.
One of the things though that you just said reminds me that often we look at kids' charts and we think, oh my God, to go through this as a kid, that's. Whereas often kids are much more flexible. Think of falling off a bike. A 70-year-old guy falling off a bike is probably going to not do as well, as a 6-year-old or 7-year-old who will roll with it. And so we have to be careful about putting our fears and our stuff onto them that then end up making it worse than it necessarily might have been. I'm not saying you did that, by the way. Sounds wonderful.
She had her like climactic moment of despair and depression, and then it was like this big opening. It was amazing. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so all right, here we go. Some of the key like takeaway points. Use transit to alter awareness. Like we can use these transits to alter our awareness, expand our perception. When we do this, we actually enable the opportunity to change the past, which alters the choices we make in the present, which changes our trajectory into the future.
Yep.
All right. And trust in Allah, but tie your camel. And transit is part of this bigger context of our skin ripping as we grow.
Yeah, I think it's trust in Allah and tie your camel.
Trust in Allah and tie your camel.
Not but.
Oh, did I say but?
No, maybe I heard that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And,
but okay.
Yeah, it's an and. And that is some serious context to work with.
So we were talking about good and bad, and it made me it actually made me think, because I've had since last week when we talked about the words for the week, and I had these Dylan songs in my mind that you may not know, but later when I did my monthly forecast, I actually closed with a short snippet from Stuck Inside of Mobile with the Memphis Blues again. And YouTube busted me for copyright infringement, and I had to redo the entire damn thing. I mean, so I was totally annoyed with that. But I'm not going to, I would love to play this, but I'm not going to. But when we talked about good and bad in my back pages, Dylan actually says in my back pages, yes, my guard stood hard when abstract threats too noble to neglect deceived me into thinking I had something to protect. Good and bad, I define these terms quite clear, no doubt, somehow. But I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. Good and bad.
Wow. That's a really great quote. Be good to put that in the show notes. Jamie, can we put that in the show notes? It's really
I've
good.
just put it into the chat box.
Awesome. Okay. Amazing, Rick. Thank you so much. That was a really incredibly thorough and just well thought through explanation for all of us that are looking at both collective transits that look overwhelming and quote unquote scary, also individual transits as they happen in our lives.
Well, it may have been good, but it wasn't well thought through, because I thought it through as I was. I mean, it's stuff I've thought about for years and years and years and years.
Like obviously, you've been thinking about it your whole life.
Right. Yeah. When you asked the question, I really thought 3 minutes, and then we could talk. But no, and obviously
that's evident that this has been a lifelong contemplation, and that I asked the question and you think you're going to answer it in 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden 50 minutes later or 60 minutes later, we've had like a full entire complete full circle. So thank you for that. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here. I don't know if anybody's still here. It's been a long one, but thank you for listening in. Rick, is there anything that you want to direct people's attention to?
Always to my Instagram, Rick Levine Astrologer. That's enough for here and now.
Yes, we would love for you to check out our Instagram as well, because we are taking snippets from talks like this and reminding you at very key opportune times of the messages in them. So if you like to get those like just, highlight reel kinds of things, there's a lot of that happening on our Instagram, a lot coming from you, Rick. That's astrology.hub if you're an Instagram person. We're also on Facebook. We do more of the Facebook Live thing than we do the snippets on Facebook, because they don't really get to anybody. So we just don't do them. So, all right. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. And as always, thank you for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode.